And welcome back to Game Escape, here today to do a video that I've wanted to do for a long time, and that's talk about my memories with Nintendo Power magazine. And they are actually some of my fondest video gaming memories. Nintendo Power was, for myself, and I think for a lot of people who grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, it was just a tremendous source of video gaming exposure and knowledge. And I sort of look back on those early magazines from the late 80s, early 90s to about 1992 or 1993 as being kind of the heyday of Nintendo Power. It was, I think, the magazine of record for, not to say that it was the best video game magazine out, because I don't think it was, but it was kind of that object that connected you to the world of Nintendo in a way that really no other product could. So what I have in front of me right here are just sort of the magazines that I have left. I bought these. I didn't have a subscription. It was kind of a thing where people would give them to me, or I was in Toys R Us or someplace that sold magazines, and I just sort of picked them up on a month-to-month basis. I had more than this, but of course over the course of the years you tend to misplace things, so this collection represents what I have left from Nintendo Power, and I just thought I would sort of go through it and look at some of the highlights and just really try to celebrate this amazing magazine. So we're going to start off with, I think this is probably the earliest magazine that I have left in my collection, and that is Mega Man 3, the Mega Man 3 issue. I know the game came out in 1990, so obviously this magazine probably was released shortly thereafter. And, you know, think about being a kid in 1990, no internet, and your only connection to video games, at least in my case, was Toys R Us or the local video game store or local video rental store. There was a place that sort of did video game rentals, sold some games, and then had a pretty robust movie rental business. And that was it. If you didn't go to one of those two places, you had no connection to what was going on in your beloved world of Nintendo. And of course, at that time, Nintendo was kind of the de facto standard. Everyone had an NES. And if we just look through here, I mean, think about how amazing it was to get this big, bright, colorful magazine. Of course, they were laid out in Japan, and you flip through. They always had like a little segment here about sort of write in, ask for advice, stuff like that. And then you turn and you have Mega Man. And look at the gloss here. And what was interesting about Nintendo Power was that it kind of always straddled being a kind of hints and tips, strategy guide type of magazine, and then also talking about games and kind of previewing all these awesome games. Now let's zoom in here. One of the things I used to love is they would give you kind of printout of the level and would explain, you know, what you would have to do. And that was really, really unique at the time. There were no game facts. There was really no source for this information outside of Nintendo Power. It talked about the different bosses that you would fight. I mean, just really, really incredible. I mean, what a way to get you excited for this game if you didn't already have it. And as a lot of people had mentioned, you know, back in the day, you didn't know when games were going to come out. They just sort of appeared in these stores. And maybe you didn't get to that store. It wasn't a day to go out and buy games. And so maybe 3 months later, you pick up the game, and you always had this strategy guide as a way to go through. And this was just a wonderful write-up. I didn't own Mega Man 3, and in fact I rented it, and I was not very good at it. And this didn't actually help me that much, but just a tremendous write-up. As we move forward here, just sort of going through, and it had these sort of the top secret section about new games that were coming out. Let's pull out another one. That was pretty good. Mega Man issue. What do we have here? Star Trek. Kind of remember buying this. I don't know what I bought with it, but I remember buying this and a game. And yeah, this one still has the... They had a poster. Some of them had some cards. Oh, this was the F-Zero edition. Now, I just did a video on F-Zero. Absolutely love the original F-Zero on the SNES, and so we can zoom in. I know we have some glare here, but that was one of the one of the nice things. Just this nice glossy layout. It just jumped off the page. That was something that I think Nintendo Power, people who wrote the magazine, that were just so good at is making each turn of the page exciting with the graphics, good size screenshots, the text sort of wrapping around. Then you would have kind of like the artwork here. And actually, this is one of the first shots that I saw. Well, I don't know when this came out, but this was probably one of the first publications that I got to see some Super Nintendo coverage on, and of course I wanted the Super Nintendo desperately after seeing this. I mean, just look at the track layouts. I mean, it's really, really nice work. Of course, you had the Nestor comics, and of course the final issue of Nintendo Power, I think, had a really kind of sad Nestor comic to sort of end things. Star Trek: The Adventure Begins. I do not remember this game at all. Didn't own it. Probably, I recall renting one that was maybe the Deep Space Nine or the Next Generation game, and I thought that was terrible. Roger Clemens MVP Baseball, oh my god. I remember a friend got that and played the heck out of that one summer. What else do we have in here? Now this was NES Classic, so it isn't even a classic at this time. Metroid. It's a pretty cool issue. And again, Metroid came out a lot earlier than I believe the publication of this magazine, so they never really did, I guess, a Metroid strategy guide. So this was absolutely incredible just to see this. Shatterhands. Do not remember that game at all. Oh, and here's the poster. This was a Flintstones rollout poster. Glad I kept that intact, probably because I thought this Flintstones sucked at that point. Special feature on the Game Boy. The original Castlevania game, which I had. Maybe that's what I picked up. I don't really remember. The Simpsons. I mean, just the Game Boy was exciting at this time. The Game Boy was, God, something if you had it, it was just amazing when it first came out. And Super NES Q&A, yeah, I guess maybe I picked this up because I was getting excited for the Super NES. And this was the thing that, I talked about this in my video, why can't NES games be used on the Super NES? This is what caused my parents to say no to the Super Nintendo. See what it says here. When Nintendo's designers began planning the Super NES, their goal was to make the hottest game system ever. At first they wanted to make the new machine compatible with the NES game packs, but they soon realized that it would be much more expensive, and some of the extra features of the Super NES might have had to be sacrificed. They didn't want to compromise on quality. Besides, it's a simple matter to connect both the NES and the Super NES to one television. I tried to explain that to my parents, but they said, no, maybe this was the magazine that did it. Maybe I showed this to them, and this is what got them off of the NES or Super NES bandwagon. Let's quickly take a look at some other ones here. Got the Street Fighter II Turbo. Love Street Fighter II, so excited for that. This is obviously probably about 94. Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Pretty cool. What else do we have in here? Goof Troop. I mean, some of the games they... Oh, yeah, the comics. Always had an interesting comic section. But some of the games that they promoted were pretty crappy, honestly. This was it's a Game Boy game. I think I remember playing Star Trek: The Next Generation and thought that was terrible. This is a little bit earlier. Obviously the original Street Fighter. What do they have in here? A Legend of Zelda comic. I'm just going to zoom through these, and then I'll show you guys my absolute favorite issue of all time. Centipede. Interesting. Magic Sword. Don't really recall that game. Super Metroid. Oh man, Super Metroid. I wanted that game so badly when that came out. That was one of the reasons why I was just like, oh god, I've got to get an SNES. And of course, I think that came out in 94, 95. But again, you just see these wonderful layouts. And for this game, you really needed a map. Pretty cool. What do we have here? I mean, this is just so awesome just to go through and to be introduced. The Jetsons, that kind of sucked. What was the poster here? Probably like the Jungle Book. What is this? Yes, the Jungle Book. SNES game. Sports write-up. Spectre. Interesting. Tecmo Super NBA Kirby. Comic. Super Mario All-Stars, a game that, God, I was also really into that. That was, I think, the first game I got when I eventually got the SNES back in 96, I think that was. I mean, I can't go through every page here. Star Fox comic, but just sort of flip randomly some of this stuff. Pinball, Battletoads. Alright, let's see. What's next? We have the Lemmings. Lemmings. Don't really recall ever playing that game. It's into one of those games that were around, but just never made its way into my house. Legend of Zelda comic. More Metroid. Metroid 2 Return of Samus. So this was the Game Boy Metroid game, which I did not have. Seems like maybe this was played on a Super Game Boy. Not really sure. Huh. Star Wars, more comics, Mega Man 4, Final Fantasy 2, so this is a pretty good issue. Just take a look at two more and then I'll show you my favorite issue of all time. This is Donkey Kong Country. Of course, when that came out, I mean, people were absolutely amazed by the graphics. I mean, that really was pushing the SNES new heights of the Final Fantasy 3. Yeah, I remember really sort of enjoying this issue and salivating over this game. I first actually read about it in GamePro, but yeah, Killer Instinct, Win Killer Instinct arcade machine. It's a shame that they don't have the dates. I mean, obviously this was 94, but the special moves, Indiana Jones. Alright. Moving on, we have, just randomly, The Secret of Mana. I remember being very excited about that game. You know, at this point, I was reading GamePro and EGM a little bit more, but ActRaiser. But I'd still pick these up from time to time. I think as you mature as a gamer, like, the comics became less interesting. And Kirby's Pinball Land, I remember that game. I mean, I guess, you know, at a certain point, I started either recycling these, or my parents started recycling these. I I kind of remember I had some of the earlier issues. I had the Mario World issue. I don't know. I had some ones from like more from 89, 90. I don't know what I did with them. I remember I had the WWF one where I think they were talking about Steel Cage Challenge, and that was big for me because I was like a wrestling fan, and I wanted that game so badly. So yeah, so that's it. But yeah, I guess, was this Turtles, the arcade game? Turtles Tournament Fighters. Yeah, I kind of remember that. Didn't play it all that much. I think I rented it once. But yeah, I mean, my new thing was reading EGM, so I guess I let my parents throw some of the older ones out. But I mean, I think I still have a fairly representative collection. Okay, so here we go. My favorite issue of all time. And it's one that I spent hours just kind of absorbed in and salivating over. And that was the 50th anniversary issue, Link's Awakening. The gold cover, the owl from the beginning of the game. And, I cut something out there. Let's see. Well, actually, believe it or not, I as a big wrestling fan, I was actually pretty pumped about the Royal Rumbles games because you could do finishers and use chairs. So yeah, that was part of it. But let's get to the Zelda. It just had the most amazing Zelda feature in here. What was the poster? I left the poster. Oh, that poster of the previous 50 Nintendo Powers, which is pretty cool. I'm glad childhood me decided not to rip that out and draw all over it. We have the Nestor's comic. Where is... Here we go. Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. I have to explain something about this game. As I mentioned in my SNES versus Genesis video, I was not allowed to have a Super Nintendo. As I said, we just read it because of the compatibility issue. But I was just a die-hard fan of RPGs and Nintendo properties. So, what was I going to do? I don't know, I was so depressed, I had the TurboGrafx 16, I had the Genesis, but it didn't really sort of scratch the itch I had for role-playing games and classic Nintendo franchises, and I had seen The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, in stores and in a friend's house, and I so desperately wanted to play that game. Well, when I saw the write-up on Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and saw just this map and the fact that they captured so much of what made A Link to the Past awesome, I had to have this. And I remember it was a snowstorm, and I sort of begged my parents, please take me out, I need to buy this game. And we went to a Best Buy, which at the time was a big thing because Best Buy had just come into our area, and I got this game, and it was an incredible experience. I don't know if I had the magazine. I probably had the magazine first. I mean, again, this was around the time where I was reading EGM too. But just look at... I mean, I was just absorbed in this map. And again, this is a time... No internet. This was the only connection you had to video games. And so I remember I would sit there, when I was a kid, with Nintendo Power First, then Electronic Gaming Monthly, just absorbed in it. You'd read it again and again. It was a way of connecting to the hobby every single day. So these issues were almost like, relics. So you would just constantly sort of stare at them and imagine and dream about what these games would be like. And in the case of A Link to the Past, or Link's Awakening, it was better than what I imagined when I saw it in these magazines. And then I went back and I actually used this, and it was just, it just brings back so many memories. That's the end of it, of just looking at this magazine, looking at this world, wanting to travel to it, and then being able to do so. And it was like the first sort of Nintendo-style RPG that I could get my hands on, and it was truly, truly amazing. Now, my one regret is that I had the Nintendo Player's Guide to Link's Awakening, but I either lost it or threw it away, and that kills me because I remember spending a lot of time with that as well, and it's actually quite valuable. But anyway, just a time in gaming that, we'll never have again. Yes, I mean, I read Retro Gamer Now. You have the iPad, and you can sort of follow gaming all the time. That's great, and the kind of YouTube, Twitch, the sort of social experience that has grown up around gaming is kind of awesome in its own way. But there was something about the isolation, the fact that, you had this hobby, not everyone shared it, and these magazines and these images were that sort of connecting fabric between you and games when you couldn't turn on your NES because it was late at night and you had to go to school, or, you were on vacation and you couldn't take the games with you, and so just to have a couple Nintendo Powers with you was a way of entering this wonderful world of gaming, and it was so wonderful as a child to have that. And I think it's sad that we've kind of lost that aspect of the hobby. So I thank you as always for watching Game Escape, and I will be back very shortly, perhaps by the end of this week, with some PS4 coverage. Thanks for watching.